I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you. This is, of course, what democracy is all about. As many of you know, I grew up in Rochester, and from a family of modest circumstances. My dad did not finish high school before he left to help bring in some money for his family of origin. He was drafted into the Second World War with his 4 other brothers, and they were the Italian version of the Sullivan family in that experience. When he got out, he and one of his other brothers opened a restaurant in downtown Rochester. It was on South Avenue between Main and Broad, if anyone goes that far back, where the convention center now sits. And as it turned out, my mom, who did finish high school in, I think, 1941, was working as a barmaid in a tavern across the street, and that's how they met, and the rest of that story is history. I worked at my dad's restaurant growing up. It truly was the best education I ever have received. Definitely gave me a sense of hard work, and as I have met so many farmers now and have been learning about their experience throughout this district, I think I have come to the conclusion that people who grow up on farms and people who are sole proprietors in restaurants are the hardest workers of anyone I meet. I'm sure other people will say, well, what about me too? But a lot of hard work. I did go to university, and that was not indicated. It just turned out that I had a lot of curiosity, and the University of Rochester was about 1.25 miles from where I grew up in my family house, and I would ride my bike by there, and I wanted to go, so eventually I kind of pushed my way into it. And after I did that, my parents were very supportive. They originally wanted me to take over the restaurant, and got touched with the education bug, and so followed up immediately by going to graduate school at Binghamton University, where I earned a doctorate in American history, and I began teaching Ithaca College and Keuka College and even the University of Buffalo, before I came back to Ithaca to marry and start a family, teach at Cornell, and then also go to law school. And the law school was an intentional path that I had set out after going to the University of Rochester, because I was so grateful to have had this experience in college. I wanted to make a career of providing it for everyone else after me to do it. That's also one of the reasons why I'm running, but I'll get to that. I worked at Cornell after law school in family and social policy, and then in 2001 took an interesting pivot into information technology, and if someone had told me that that's where I was going to realize this dream to be a university administrator, I would have asked, what is it? And but it also has provided me with a wonderful competency now in the last 15 years in internet policy issues that have concepts you are now familiar with, such as net neutrality or internet deployment, and intellectual property balance, still an important issue that we haven't fully addressed. Privacy. The last electronic privacy law we have in the United States at the federal level was promulgated in 1986, and that is before the internet was even available to the public. So lots of things that are quite timely, quite important for the politics that we have now set. I retired from Cornell in 2014. I started a small consultancy business, and then had great clients, New York Public Library, University of Massachusetts, and while at UMass, was asked to be the academic dean of a cybersecurity certificate program, and I like to talk about that because it's a great example of a public-private partnership that we could be doing here in this district. It was with the Mass Mutual Corporation, and we were able to get people in, train them into some basic information security, cybersecurity, and then 9 months later, a non-matriculated program. They were able to go out and get jobs, $60,000, $70,000, in an area not unlike ours. It was the rural western part of Massachusetts. I entered politics because democracy and citizenship and opportunity have been core components of my life, my values. And as I have been watching politics in, 30, 40 years over the course of my adult life, I have been increasingly concerned about the deterioration of some of those values and principles in our political life. And then in particular, with the election of 2016, I was concerned that the Russian interference in our elections was taking place. As a cybersecurity specialist, I had been tracking it. And the night of November 8th, I said to myself, I wonder if anyone in Congress has a specialty in cyber. I looked it up that night, no one did. And then my next thought was, gee, maybe I'll be in touch with Congressman Reed and see if he would be interested in my background. And I didn't finish the sentence in my own mind, because having gone to a law school in Ithaca and having worked at Cornell and having raised my family there, given how much he has always made fun of it, it just seemed obvious to me that he would have no interest in anything I had to say about it. My children were finishing up, especially my younger one, his college career, so I wasn't needed at home anymore. And I was turning 59 and a half, which meant I could take money out of my retirement without paying the penalty. And it all came together, the stars lined up where I eventually said, gee, I think I'll jump into the race. As some of you know, because I met you here, it was a very competitive primary, and I survived. I mean, I am the one who won the primary. And I'm very honored now to be the Democratic Party, Working Family Party, and Women's Equality Party candidate for Congress. In terms of a platform, I'll try to run through it quickly, Josh, so that we can get right to the questions. Economic development remains, I believe, the most important goal for this district. I know the economy is supposedly taking off all around us, but not so much, especially if you drive with me out to some of the more western areas, but you can see it right here in Seneca County. You can see it in every single one of the 11 counties. There are some areas where it's a little bit more than others, Allegheny, Cattaraugus. And my understanding of economic opportunity and development, please have a seat. Right up here front, there's a lot of open seats, and I promise I won't bite you. Is to have healthy people, educated people, the right kind of infrastructure, proper management of our natural resources, and a good tax plan. And as I look at that, I see that Tom Reed has voted against those opportunities for this district every single time. It's not even close. He has voted against health care, affordable health care. He is doing nothing to help students out with usurious interest rates on their student loan debt, or leveling the playing field for public schools throughout our district so people have more of an opportunity. The infrastructure is very wanting in this district. We do not have the internet in about half of it geographically, and this is a basic utility that we need for farmers to farm, for students to learn, for businesses to choose to be in that place, for our libraries, for our society. These three things are all obligations also of the federal government. Healthy people, educated people, the right kind of infrastructure. If it were up to Mr. Reed, we would have fracked this district, except for that little corner of Cuba Lake where his cottage sits. And so I think that would have been a very unfortunate set of circumstance. I'm grateful for the state ban. And in terms of the tax policy, I hope some of the questions will refer to it, because I'd like to say a lot, and my 10 minutes is probably winding up. Let me just say this one part of it. The $10,000 cap on deduction of state and local taxes may or may not apply to you, but I can tell you this. It is like putting a do not enter sign to new business around this district. And how a representative from a state that historically has had high taxes is really inconceivable to me. It's like he didn't show up for work and say, I'm sorry, I may be in agreement with all of the rest of this tax plan, and I have a lot of criticisms of it. But even on that one point, he should have stood up and said, look, we can't do this because in New York State, we've given a lot of money to education. We've put in a lot of money into our health care. We simply can't do this because it's going to hurt our people disproportionately, and it's also going to be a big break on attracting new business. So those are the main outlines of my campaign. I do believe in immigration reform. I can define that. I'm sure it will come up. I believe in reform in labor, to support labor unions and a living wage and a working and middle-class people ability to have a good life. And I also have been very concerned about a basic quality of leadership that I find lacking in Mr. Reed. And that is in light of a presidency where we have a modeling of someone to our entire country and to our children, of someone who makes fun of disabled people, the way he speaks about women, the way he talks about immigrants. I think that Mr. Reed or any sensible representative should stand up and say, Mr. Reed, Mr. Trump, we don't talk like that in this district. That's not a good model for our children. And we expect more leadership in our president. And I expect more leadership in our congressman. And so altogether, those are the reasons why I'm running. And I thank you very much for your patience in hearing me out. Okay, go ahead, Josh.
So we are having some technical issues with the microphones. You were speaking at a perfectly fine level right there.
Okay.
I'm going to speak up while I'm asking the questions.
Okay.
We've collected some from the audience, and we've got a bunch that we also had collected prior to today. So we're going to kick things off with the environment. Deborah Robinson-Jorgensen wants to know what federal legislation you support to protect local lakes and local water supplies.
Well, I support and would advance, because it's kind of fallen into a limbo, the Anti-Fracking Act that would be at the federal level. I'm glad, as I mentioned, for the ban against fracking, but that is, I'm sure you know, in New York State, and it's based on a health order that determined that the process is disadvantageous to biological life, especially to nervous systems, including humans. But I think that we now know the damage that many other states that do not have such a ban have experienced: Pennsylvania, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas, and so forth. It is not a safe method. It is not a safe approach. And so that would be the first one about which I would have concern for the environment. I would follow that up with an Off Fossil Fuels Act. That is a law that has a trajectory to disincentivize fossil fuels and to incentivize renewable energies. I don't believe a light switch approach, we turn off all fossil fuels today, is reasonable or appropriate, but I do think it would be good for the country to set ourselves on a schedule where we can create the expectations of where we need to go and where we've been, and then where we need to go in the future. I also believe that water quality issues are the most important issue in this district, and they also are for the country, but people are just kind of coming around to the awareness of them. And so I do believe that if we had a responsible EPA, which under this administration, presidential administration, we do not, it may then require Congress, and this is going to be a theme, where the federal government at the agency level has not been exercising the leadership and responding to the needs of people around this district. Congress may have to step in and do the trick, and we may have to do something about protecting water quality in our district and all around the United States. I am not in favor of pointing fingers. I'm not in favor of just pouncing on agriculture because of the contribution of nitrates and phosphates. There are things we can do that we can help each other, I believe, to satisfy environmentalists, satisfy agriculture, and satisfy people who just want good water in their riverways and lakes. And by the way, the algae blooms are, this bacteria is in every waterway in this district, from Chautauqua through the Finger Lakes, all the river systems. I am also concerned, but this is a deeper conversation because I don't think there's an automatic one-size-fits-all law at the federal level. But I have had as a theme in my campaign, stop treating the 23rd District like a dump. I know that has particular resonance in Seneca County. Right now I have been trying to get people with backgrounds in environmental law and other areas. I just met a man last night in Cattaraugus County. I know a lawyer up in the Tompkins County area who have expertise in this and have been very useful to their municipalities. But I think right now I want to at least share the resource for these municipalities to start working together. I know that you know the shtick The shtick is the external entities such as the incinerator, they pick out a community that is not financially well off. They promise jobs, people are hungry for the jobs, but of course, then we've got these terrible, terrible trade-offs. So I'm not sure exactly that I have the ready answer of here's the federal law that we're going to pass. I'm just trying to assure you I understand that the problem exists and that I think we need to be thinking about it comprehensively instead of saying not in my backyard kind of approach that has been happening. In particular, let me point out, there is a nuclear waste site within this district. Up here, you may not be familiar with it. It's in Cattaraugus County. It's called West Valley. The federal government had hoped that that area was going to be the first of many nuclear reprocessing sites. It didn't work out. I don't know all the history of why it didn't work out. All I know is that atomic waste dating back to the atomic program in the Second World War sits there. It is being managed, but I don't believe readily enough, and I am particularly concerned about it because it sits on top soil and waterways that eventually go out into Lake Erie. 1/6 of our fresh water supply in the world could be at risk. So there's a whole lot of environmental issues under that topic.
Okay, so you read off a couple of really big local environmental issues. To that end, Alex from Geneva wants to know, will you advocate and support the local elected officials who desperately need support from elected officials like the 23rd District Representative?
Oh, yes.
Will you and can you and how would you propose? You said you would work with the people who know what they're doing, know this work. What would that actually look like, though?
Well, what I'm trying to make it look like.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I guess they can't hear
Josh,
you,
usually we can't hear very well.
Unfortunately, I can't yell much louder.
Do you want me to yell?
So Alex from Geneva wants to know if Ms. Mitrano, if elected, will be an advocate for local elected officials who he believes needs the support of congressional representatives, like that representing the 23rd.
The answer is yes.
Of course.
So, a specific EPA-related question. Where do you stand, this is also from Deborah from Bergen, where do you stand on the EPA's Waters of the United States Rural Clean Water Act of 2015 and the 2017 executive order to review, rescind, and revise the Clean Water Act of 2015?
I think that those are attempts to undermine those laws, and so I think that Congress needs to get a hold of it. I said there's going to be a theme in a lot of what I said, that where we do not feel as if the administration is being responsible to the needs of people, and I'm going to, God willing, represent the needs of the people in the 23rd District, then Congress has to step in and do something about it. So those administrative attempts are to undermine, I believe, water quality and the environment. And so I think we would have to move it to Congress to be sure. Because if Congress creates a higher threshold, a higher bar, it's much more difficult for an administration to undermine it.
All right, so let's talk healthcare. You have said that you will fight for affordable healthcare, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Do you believe in a single-payer system or something else, a hybrid perhaps?
I would support the Affordable Care Act if a single-payer-like system were not available. Sometimes these opportunities simply don't come up. They don't make it out of committee in Congress. But I would not stand on an expectation or hope that we can move in that direction in such a way that I'm not going to protect the 21 million people who are now on the Affordable Care Act. I do believe, and I've really given this a lot of thought, that something like a single-payer system or a Medicare for all system is the direction that we should take. And I could go through my thinking on it, but why don't I just do a few highlights? We have exorbitant healthcare costs in the United States. That is a real problem, and if Mr. Reed still believes what he has believed in the past when he had debates with previous candidates, so this is where I'm getting the information, he would say, we have to drive healthcare costs down. And he and I would agree with that. I do not know what his plan is. His rhetoric has been that old standard line of repeal and replace. But I have no clue, and I have looked, and if you know better than I do, please share it with me, that he has never offered anything in the replace category that makes any sense, or he's never even offered anything, period, end of sentence. And so it's without question in my mind that health care should be available to everyone and without all of these exorbitant expenses. People should not have to acquire tremendous medical debt. They shouldn't have to be bankrupt in order to discharge it. There is something wrong with the system where we still have 30 million people without any form of health care, where children show up to kindergarten with all of their teeth abscessing because they've never seen a dentist and had the proper health care. And I could go on and tell you the stories, but I bet you know them already. It makes no sense to me to be in a country of this considerable wealth and have its wealth so improperly planned for and balanced that we are not offering basic health care to every person in the United States. So how we get there is the question. If we take a pure free market system, it is my analysis that is not what we have, and that's why the costs are so exorbitant. If there were a great big appetite among Republicans, who are the ones who tend to tout the free market, to use antitrust types of measures to break up the health maintenance organizations, because there's no competition in the market right now to do it, and that's why the costs are high. That's what a free market is supposed to do when you have a lot of competition. That's how costs are supposed to go down in a free market model of the economy. That is not what we have right now. Rachel, how many funds do you have? And I was just getting to such an important point. No, I mean, this is the problem.
No, that wasn't for you, that was for me.
I know. We don't have competition in the system, and that's why these costs are so high. And so here we are with that. So maybe it would be some big antitrust kind of measure to break it up, but I don't really think that is even the best approach. I think we have to move then, because right now we're kind of caught in a betwixt and between situation, and that is why it's so fraught, and that is why it is so difficult. I believe we have to move forward with putting government not in a position of being the employer to the providers, not owning the drug companies, as would be a socialist model, and Mr. Reed will want to call what I'm talking about socialist, so I'm trying to explain to you, no matter what he says, no matter what his rhetoric, it is not that I'm advocating. I am advocating for a Medicare-like all model, by the way, that would include dental, hearing, and vision. I still don't get that. Like those things don't matter to people? Where, and this is the important part that gets back to the economy, where the government is in a position to negotiate on the behalf of people to lower the costs. We can't afford it. If we take out the 1/4 to 1/3 administrative costs that you're paying right now every time you pay a doctor bill, if we take out, have you ever seen what the compensation packages are for CEOs of some of these health maintenance organizations? Some are making, hold on to your seat, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day. If we cut out that greed, we can be in a position to negotiate the remainder cost to something that is more appropriate for us all to be able to pay through our taxes into a system. I have been working with Dr. Vivian Lorenzo. We gave a presentation in Geneva in the primary, and we just gave one up here in Seneca County last week. And if many of you wanted to get down to more of the details about it, I think she's got it boiled down into a nice slide deck. It explains a lot more and better than I am doing right now. I'm just giving you the highlights. I'm sure our team would be happy to put that together or just be in touch with her. But I really have thought about this in the Second Amendment issues a lot in the course of the 15 months now that I have been doing this. And I just sincerely believe we need to be working towards that model. By the way, and maybe I'm just thinking of the primary a lot because that's my last association to being in this space. I do not believe, as some of the other primary contenders do, that we should do it like a light switch. I'm afraid that could spike taxes. And I don't know about you. I don't mind paying my taxes, but I'm tired of paying them and not seeing the services come back. And I'm kind of like, I'm done. Like, what I pay now is about what I want to pay and no more than that. So I personally would not be in favor of having our taxes spike. And I can tell you that politically that would make any proposal of single payer or Medicare for all dead in the water before we can even begin a decent conversation about it. I don't believe in the light switch approach. I believe right now what is on the books in Congress is a Senate proposal, and it would be more of an implementation where, for example, you bring the age down from 65 to 55 and then 55 to 40, or something like that. We can work out the details. But over the course of 3 to 5 years, we could build it all in and do it from there. So that is my top level healthcare approach.
Excellent. So,
By the way, you still would have some insurance companies, because this would not cover your elective surgeries. It would not cover your cosmetic surgeries. So there still would be a market. It just wouldn't be one that is so overwhelmingly taking advantage of us and bankrupting all of us. It's kind of bankrupting all of us, if you think about it. And I want to say one more thing. Have you ever been in a relationship with someone with whom you argue about the same thing all the time? It's maddening, isn't it? That's what we've been doing with healthcare in this country for 50 years. We have a lot of other issues that we're not getting to because we're like that engine that never turns over, so you can't start the car and move on. We're fighting about this over and over again. I think it would be for the health of this country in a larger way than a sore throat to settle this issue and move on to some of the other stuff that challenges us.
so obviously staying somewhat within the healthcare realm, opioid epidemic, opioid addiction is probably one of the biggest problems that counties like Seneca face, period. What would you do, or what could you do in Congress to address this problem?
Yes, sir. Well, I'm in a campaign. I'm not teaching a class. So I have to begin by drawing a contrast between me and my opponent. Mr. Reed's solution to the opioid problem is to have the death penalty for drug traffickers. Period, end of sentence. That is his solution to this opioid crisis. Now, let's just talk about that for a minute. I don't know what that means, drug traffickers. Does that mean the CEO of the pharmaceutical corporations that have been pushing this out? So much of the overdose. We have had about 175 of people within this district just in the last couple of years of it. The numbers nationally, and it depends on who you read and how they're tracking it, whether it's the so-called legal drugs combined or separated from the illegal heroin, it's 200 to 300,000 people. And, so the idea that we would have an ill-defined law calling for the death penalty, does that mean the kid who was the quarterback in his football team in high school has an injury for which he is treated with an opiate when he goes to get it fixed? And I'm not a medical scientist, but some people get addicted very readily. And then he's going into his grandfather's medicine cabinet when grandpa had a gallbladder removed and has a few extra of those pills and sells it to some other kid at school for $20. Is he a drug trafficker for whom we're going to have the death penalty? Let me tell you that to say the death penalty is the solution to this problem is exactly the tactic that Mr. Reed will use over and over again, and he will use it in our debates. He will divert attention to something that is so extreme, is so absurd, that suddenly you're thinking, what? And you're forgetting about the real issue in front of us. Why does Mr. Reed take those positions? Because he gained over $100,000 in money from pharmaceutical corporate PACs in this last year to run negative ads against me in this race. And so he doesn't want you to know that. He doesn't want to talk about the influence of all of that great big corporate PAC money, $2.2 million he started with. He's now had more come in, it might be 2.5 at this point. He wants to distract the conversation to the idea of the death penalty for ill-defined drug traffickers. Let's talk sense. We have to go after the pharmaceutical companies that we know pushed these highly addictive substances, even though they knew it. We've known it in medical science for over 200 years. These are highly addictive. And they misled, defrauded people. These are clear words I'm using from Federal Trade Commission law. They misled consumers and doctors saying, oh, well, while you're in pain, you won't get addicted to it. Wrong. Oh, this isn't really very addictive the way that we're manufacturing it. Wrong. So there is so much clear legal material upon which we should be bringing suits against these pharmaceutical companies. That's the first way we go at it. And of course you will never hear that from Mr. Reed because he is a spokesperson for them rather than someone who represents the people who have suffered in this district. Second, I think that we need to be very critical of what has been going on in this country for over 50 years now, this scourge of the illegal drug trade. Why do we have a country where massive drugs are still coming through our borders for 50 years now? Where has the DEA been on this? I don't want to give them any more money were I, God willing, in a position in Congress to vote on it until we have hearings. What's wrong with our law enforcement system that we allow this illegal drug trade to exist and flourish, affecting so many of our children, so many of our parents? Vicki in the back there is a kindergarten teacher at Watkins Glen. She's shared with me every year the troopers show up at her door at least once because a parent or guardian of one of the children, kindergarten, 5 years old, in her class has either blown herself up in a meth lab, been arrested in a big bust, or overdosed in the bathroom of the restaurant where he works, or, you know, and many more. What kind of society do we have that we are not stomping around saying to law enforcement, figure out what you're doing wrong and fix it? So the idea that we have put, especially young people, in a pincher between the so-called legal drug trade, together with this illegal drug trade, of course the numbers are skyrocketing. Of course we don't have a proper handle on it. And I may not have all the answers as I stand here before you today either, but I can tell you one thing, I don't think it's death penalty to drug pushers. I want those people who are truly drug traffickers at the highest level to be arrested and be knocked out. Absolutely that. Knocked out of business. Whatever it takes, minus the death penalty. But I think we need to approach this comprehensively. And I would say that there are then some of the other issues that bring people into an attraction to it, such as desperation, poverty, not having the proper medical care, not having the proper medical care once they've been addicted and revived on streets. Law enforcement just leave them because there's no place to take them for treatment. And then eventually there's an overdose that is not treated and then removed. So I can think of a lot of things that we can start a conversation about what to do about it. But more than anything, we need an honest conversation, not fueled by money from corporate PACs to figure out what we're going to do about this issue. That's the number one thing. We need to be honest about it and not have the conversation be led by a mouthpiece for corporate PACs.
So a follow-up to that then, one of the treatment options or one of the treatment solutions that's been talked about a lot, especially further to the left, safe injection sites. Obviously that's kind of become a soundbite of sorts. But as far as treatment goes, that's one of the things that a lot of folks believe needs to be improved and more spending. Walk us through that part of the solution.
Yes.
Obviously a lot of enforcement from what we're talking about.
Yes.
But more on the treatment side than what you propose.
Well, Mr. Reed, I know, has been wanting me to be in favor of drug injection sites so that he can make a big issue out of it. Let's be sure we all understand what we're talking about. They are per se illegal in this moment. what I've said that I favor, and it follows up with what I was saying, is we need to be talking about it. I know that there are other countries that have used them as a vehicle to get people into treatment, and to be sure that they are not spreading communicable disease, especially through the needles. Those two things sound like good ideas to me. But let's be really clear about one important point that Tom Reed will never acknowledge, and I think is critical to understanding why I take this position. He makes it sound as if I am in favor of some compulsory injection sites in your neighborhood today. That is not the case. I am in favor of the conversation, and I would only be in favor of the legal transition to making these sites available under circumstances where the municipality wants to do it. So if you don't want to do it in Seneca Falls, you don't have to. But if Elmira wants to do it, and they then have it all lined up so that it's surrounded by law enforcement, and it is connected with getting addicts treatment, why won't we talk about making that an option? Because right now we're not doing very much.
All right, so let's get back into the Social Security Medicare discussion for a minute. We heard from a 22-year-old who lives in Waterloo, who actually wants to know what will you do to protect Social Security and Medicare so it's there when he is of age.
Yeah, that's a real question, isn't it? You know, it's clear as day that the extreme Republicans, and I consider Mr. Reed one of them, wants to dismantle social programs, including Social Security and Medicare. They're saying it right out loud at this point. I also believe that the tax plan of 2017 had a number of motivations and purposes. One was to let the wealthy get their hands back into the cookie jar and take out, whole chunks. The other is to now give lawmakers an alleged reason why they absolutely must go into all of our social programs, including the ones you and I have paid into. Oh my God, we now have this big deficit. What are we going to do about it? Well, you remember what Henry Sutton said about why he robbed banks? It's where the money is. So they're going to go to where the money is. But that's our money. We paid into those programs, certainly Social Security and Medicare. And I'm sorry, a very wealthy country like the United States can afford to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. I'm sorry to repeat a story that maybe some of you have heard before, but I'm going to make the point. My brother is profoundly developmentally disabled. It was accidents that happened at his birth in 1954. In 1958, he was institutionalized, not too far from here in Newark. And that place was a snake pit. It was conditions that were my nightmares as a child with my parents when I went to visit him. It was only when Medicaid came into the picture, along with some reform movements in the area, that there was a transition to humane living circumstances, such as the group home in which he still lives in Victor. Why would we have a society that would want to dismantle programs in the care of someone like Peter? We're wealthy enough. If we do it right, it should be part of what we expect a civilized society to do, which is to take care of people who cannot take care of themselves, defend themselves, or speak for themselves. And the idea that in order to give the wealthy another big chunk of our national wealth, they've already sucked up 40% of it in the last 40 years since the Reagan tax plan started with trickle-down economics. And now we have an even greater expanse into which they can grab more cash and pull it out. And they are not using it to create the jobs that was promised with this theory of trickle-down economics. They are not doing it to give their workers better wages. We know that, and we have seen it in the immediate 6 months after that act. They are not using it to make sure that more workers come into their corporations or their places of business. They've given it to their shareholders. It's not coming back in a way that could be proper planning for all of us, including get your damn hands off our Social Security and Medicare, for starts. And then let's go back to some basic principles. If you're a wealthy enough country to protect people who cannot take care of themselves, why wouldn't we do it? So that's my basic thought on it. I'm happy to go into more economic detail if anyone wants.
And we're definitely going to shift gears to that way. Earlier this week, your stance on outsourcing and defending jobs in manufacturing was challenged by your opponent. You're in a community that was literally built on manufacturing.
Yep.
Will you defend manufacturing jobs if elected?
Absolutely. I am endorsed by the AFL-CIO. Tom Reed is not. Of course I will. What's the next question?
How will you accomplish that? Because there aren't a lot of manufacturing jobs left in this region.
That's my platform. We want investment, right, in the 23rd District. You want investment in Seneca County and Seneca Falls. Do you know what investors do? Just pretend each of you has $50 million, and you're going to look around to see, how you're going to invest it. What are you going to look for? Healthy people, educated and trained people, a place that has the right infrastructure in place. Make sure the environment hasn't been despoiled, and you've got a good tax plan that's going to work with your investment. Mr. Reed has voted against affordable health care. He has never talked about public-private partnerships until he heard it come out of my mouth. He's done nothing to address the usurious interest rates that we now put onto students. How many of you have children or are yourself or grandchildren who have these interest rates that are like 6 to 12%? I'm sorry, that's wrong. And how did we get there? The bankers came into Congress with the Higher Education Act that was designed to open access to education. And they said, get me a big secured federal loan suite and I'll put those interest rates on it and don't put any ceiling on the interest rates. That's how we get it. Come on, when are we going to have a congressman who's going to stand up and say, you're taking advantage of people in my district and you don't need that money. It's just going in your personal pocket. It's not even coming back to the society in a big way. I've shared my thoughts with you about the environment. Would you come to a place that had been all fracked up? No. And would you come to a place that has high state and local taxes, but now you have a $10,000 cap on it for your deductions in your federal tax return? No. So the idea that Tom Reed is challenging my position on manufacturing is ludicrous.
So carrying on with that theme, how do you educate and retain the workforce here so that they can continue working here and not go somewhere else?
Well, we have excellent schools of higher education. We have 3 community colleges, Jamestown Community College, Corning, and then TC3. We can build programs like the one that I built. And we can also look at our school system, something that, again, Mr. Reed has never once talked about. So I'll tell you exactly how you do it. You take a program such as exists in Corning High School, where they have worked with Corning, and they have Corning Incorporated, and they have learned what is the skill set you want students to have once they graduate. Then you work with the community college, and in short, what you do is by the time you have someone graduating high school, public education, meaning no student debt, they have a skill set the equivalent of an associate's degree, and they can go right out and get a job at $50,000, $60,000, a good living wage. I built a program like that. I know what we're talking about. We can do it. We have the educators. We have opportunities such as Corning Incorporated that yes, it can work. If we had 5 more Corning Incorporateds in this district, we'd be having a different conversation. To me, that's the goal overall. If you want to know what is your vision, it would be 21st century companies in this district. But it's going to take healthy people. I've talked to the Corning executives. They said, we have jobs. But the people, it's very hard to find people in this area to fill them. Why? They don't pass drug tests. And Tom Reed's solution is the death penalty for drug traffickers to the healthcare problem and our addiction problem. He says nothing about supporting education that would provide this kind of educational opportunity that exists in Corning, in Cattaraugus, or Allegheny, or Chautauqua, or Seneca, or Ontario, or Tioga, or Chemung, or Steuben, outside of Corning. What is his proposal? I mean, I could go on. I'm an educator. I could tell you about all kinds of programs that exist in distance education, in hybrid forms of education. But what do all of those need? You need leadership that believes in it. You need people supported enough, healthy enough to be engaged, believing that if you invest the time and money and discipline into learning, you will get something out at the end of it. And then you have to have a kind of place into which investment comes so that there are the jobs. But I don't even know, what does Mr. Reed want to do?
So it sounds like you're saying there needs to be public-private partnership with that, which obviously is a theme you're working at. Can that come at a low enough cost where it isn't a burden to taxpayers?
Absolutely.
And how would that part of it look then?
Let's start taxing the rich. Let's flip the so-called temporary and permanent tax relief. I've never heard of anything so absurd in law in my life as this idea that you give working and middle-class people a temporary tax relief, but then the 1% gets permanent? Are we in a theocracy? Is permanent coming down from the mount on high in stone? I've never heard of permanent in a system of laws. So let's flip it. Let's make theirs be the temporary, and we'll take the permanent, so long as you mention it. How about bringing the estate tax back in? You know, here's what the estate tax is designed to do. When you have a trickle-down system where you have given the big benefit to the wealthiest, with the idea that they're going to invest, start jobs, you have an estate tax to get some of what you're giving them back so that it comes back into the public. Do you know that the 2017 Tax Cut Act is on a trajectory to fully eliminate the state tax? So they get the permanent tax benefit, and then there's no estate tax attached to it. Sorry, maybe 45% was too high. I could see bringing it down to 25%. But we need it to be something if we're going to be in this trickle-down economic tax structure. I actually would have been in favor of a reduction in corporate tax, because the reality is corporations in the United States pay about 18 or 19%. They weren't paying 35%. There are a whole bunch of tax lawyers that make their entire living on working out the deductions for corporations to go from 35 down to the average of about 18 or 19%. So make it 21%, that's fine, but I would not have agreed to it without making sure that those corporations are subject to US tax laws, therefore paying tax to us, no offshore, and that they would invest at least 50% of what they made by that tax reduction back into salaries, back into jobs, back into their plants, not just to shareholders. So that's how I would do it.
Okay. Carol from Seneca Falls wanted to know what you're going to do or what your plan is for infrastructure. Obviously, a lot of upgrades and improvements need to happen. We're hearing it on the local level, state and federal level. What's the plan to get that moving?
Well, this has been a big issue of mine right from the start. I mentioned that in my professional life, I have worked on broadband deployment. We used to be #1 in the world with the internet. because we created it. We're now number 63 in the world. Can you imagine having a child be competitive to go to college if they don't have access to the internet? No. Can you, farmers can't compete. They have smart barns. They use spectrometry to test milk, sort their grains. But they don't have a robust enough internet in so many parts of this district, and that is part of why those farms are failing. And I just was out at one last week in Steuben County in the town of Jasper, where the truck came to pick up the milk of a dairy farmer for the last time after 5 generations of dairy farming. And we're doing nothing to help those folks. So I'm telling you this part of it now to say, to not have a basic utility to every farm, every home, every school, every library is going to set your district, your county, your community back. We did it in the 1930s with electricity. We did it in the 1950s with telephone. We could and should be doing it right now if we had the right kind of leadership. This is a federal obligation. I understand the economics of a spectrum, a telecommunication company that is a private, for-profit company, publicly traded, meaning every quarter they have to show profit or their shareholders are going to revolt. So you cannot expect a spectrum to go into Allegheny County and wire it all up at a loss of, I don't know, let's make up a number, $50 million. And then go to their shareholders at the end of that and say, I'm sorry, we just spent $50 million. Well, are you getting it back in more this month? No, it'll probably take 5 years. We need to get the farms back up and running. We want to attract them. The shareholders would throw you out of office. That's why the federal government has a role in making sure that your utilities are built out to it. And you know what the real insult on injury is in this case? When we transitioned Route 17 to Interstate 86, Corning Incorporated gave $10 million worth of fiber optic cable that lies along that highway. But for the most part, it is not lit. We have it there. It needs to be built out. I do not understand why Mr. Reed, who has now been in office 4 times 8 years, if this were his first time, you'd say, oh, he's a freshman congressman. He hasn't gotten his feet wet yet, hasn't had a chance to advocate. 8 years and not a word about getting the internet out to the parts of this district that are not connected to it. So that's infrastructure number 1. Number 2, if you ever try to get transportation from Jamestown to Elmira or Corning, Horseheads, you can't. There's no public transportation to get. How about the theory that goes, people born in this county, in this district, they don't want to work. I don't know whether they want to work or not, but I know they've no way to get to it. There's no transportation to the farms. There's no transportation in and out of the cities from where they might live. How about the roads? We could always use better roads, but now let's get to something that hits right here at home. How about making us prepared for extreme weather events instead of having cabins go right down into Seneca Lake? And 89 being closed for a week because it got so washed over, for the failure to know you're going to have to dig those gullies out more that run along it, because we are now having 500-year events occurring every other year and 100-year events occurring every year and so forth. We are having extreme weather events. Look at Hurricane Michael in Florence. Let's prepare for it. And for that, we need federal, state, and local alignment. And we can do it. A lot of what I saw in Lodi and what I saw in Valois and what I saw in Sheldrake was the failure to have dug out the gullies along the more major highways and then to clear the streamways that go down into the lakes. They got backed up, and it resulted in, feet of mud going through people's houses. In Sheldrake, that's what I saw. It wasn't water on the basement floor. It's going through the first floor. A river of mud. And it wasn't just one house. This is relatively simple. It's not an engineering problem. It's a problem of planning. It's a problem of political will. And to me, in my thinking, it is a problem of leadership that Tom Reed doesn't stand up and say, wow, my district is suffering. There's a lot of flooding out in Cattaraugus County in the spring. It's all over this district. We should be preparing for these events. It takes federal, state, local alignment. I see no initiative on Mr. Reed's part to have the conversation and to start to think about how we're going to address it.
So to that end, how do you execute the actual alignment of three different tracks of government that are going in and have completely different priorities in how they function, local, state, and federal?
That's what a congressman should be doing. Now, I told you the story of my brother for a reason. It wasn't until Medicaid came in and aligned with state money and local resources to be sure that people like him got out of that horrific institution and into a humane living circumstance. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. Now, the big issue with something like Medicaid is, does it go as a direct allocation into a state, or does it come to you as a block grant? I will tell you, I am in favor of a direct allocation, because a block grant means the state has discretionary judgment over it, and you know then it could get diverted, especially for people who aren't there to defend themselves and say, hey, that block grant was supposed to come to us. This is why you have to have a representative who cares about people, cares about the district, and wants to represent you, instead of someone who only answers to his corporate donors and apparently doesn't care about the result of extreme weather events, for example, if you want to put it back into that sense. That's exactly how you align those things. And how you can do it through regulations, you do it through law, how you write the law, it has to go here and there. These are the secondary questions, but of course they can be done. They've been done in the past.
Okay, so Alice, who works at the Waterloo Premium Outlets right here in
Yeah,
Seneca County.
I've been up there.
On-demand scheduling software has pretty much become the norm out there. And for her and a lot of other folks, it means hours are fluctuating by the day sometimes. It creates a lot of irregularity for the employee. What will you do to create a fair work environment, or fight for a fair work environment for those folks, especially the ones who are young families?
Labor has been getting hit on the chin for 50 years now. As a historian, I would say it began with the busting of the air traffic controllers in the 1980s. And we could fill in a lot of spaces right up until the last Supreme Court set of decisions that came out in June with the Janus case. I think people who work for a living, and especially in those circumstances who aren't in positions where you have more of your own individual bargaining power, are in a truly challenging place. There's no living wage. Minimum wage is still really, people work all day and then part-time jobs to try to make ends meet, and they're still not making ends meet. Well, how would you expect them to when the healthcare costs are so high, when the transportation costs are so high, when there is no help, for all intents and purposes, for childcare? You start adding all of the neglect up, and what it results in is a lot of expense for the individual. And then you add in how employers are using the desperation to which we have come to take advantage of them in conditions and working treatment. So I'm going to leap and say we need to revitalize our labor movement. We need to reform our labor laws to have broader definitions of organizing and collective bargaining so that we can bring new job families into the labor movement. And once we revitalize it, if it's how history worked in the 20th century, conditions will improve, wages will improve, health and safety will improve, and there will be more of a restoration of a middle-class ideal for working people in this country.
All right, so sticking with the workforce theme here, what will you do or what can you do to help make and keep workplaces safe from all forms of harassment and violence?
Well, we have some laws that are on the books. Sexual harassment has been interpreted by the courts as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 since the early 70s. Sexual assault is per se illegal as a criminal act. I think this one, the one single thing I can say at a federal level and legally is coming out in the news today, but it was already on my agenda for representation in the 23rd District from when I first started. When it comes to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we need to expand the protected categories to include transgendered people or the LGBTQ community. And just today, we see that the Trump administration is trying to walk back what the Obama administration tried to do by its interpretation through the Justice Department to use the term sex, which is protected, to include people in that community. And so the Trump administration is not only walking the Obama administration guidance back, it is also trying to insert a definition that sex is determined at birth and then there is no other opportunity for it, which would effectively truncate any opportunity to expand civil rights to at least people who identify as transgendered or non-binary. And so I think that when you send signals like that, you are reinforcing people from telling their truths about sexual harassment and sexual assault. You are pushing people deeper into the proverbial closet instead of opening up our conversations and saying, why would we allow harassment of anyone, whether they're in a protected category or not? But we have, this is cultural as much as it is a legal issue. People have to, however, feel that the law is on their side and not against them in order to be willing to tell their truths. So we need the alignment of law that is offering opportunities, reinforcing that voice, rather than trying to close it down and shut it off.
Would you advocate for an educational solution to this, where this type of training and background and education is happening in schools at a young age, developing that cultural element that you're talking about?
Well, yes, but I don't want to be in a position of, the next Common Core or the next Child Left Behind or anything like that, because frankly, I don't think that those things work very well. Our teachers are great. And then you keep telling them how to structure every word that comes out of their mouth and every second that they're in front of a class, and we're losing what we have always prized in the United States in education: critical thinking, open discourse, meaningful guidance. So I don't want to be boxed into that corner. Should we allow bullies to bully on our playgrounds? Of course not, but of course not. Should we allow a president to make fun of people who are disabled? No.
All right, so let's talk about the Second Amendment. Briefly explain your stance on gun control and what you hope to accomplish if Democrats gain a majority.
This is something that Mr. Reed, I'll give $50 to which organization can rise up? Resistance. Who are you?
Indivisible, Seneca.
Indivisible. All right, I'll give $50 to Indivisible, Seneca Falls. If at the debates, Mr. Reed does not say, Tracy Mitrano flip-flops on the Second Amendment, $50. You heard me say it. Yeah. Through the course of the primary, not having been a politician before, coming from a family of hunters, a gun owner myself, someone who cares very much about educational institutions and environment especially, but of course health and safety of the society overall, I recognize this is a very challenging question for all of us. In the course of the primary, a number of ideas came up, and I actually said right here in this room, we must register guns and license gun owners. I do not have that as a position. I said it probably too emphatically, and it kind of came out of my mouth. I should not have used the word must on it. It is something for us to think about, but my own opinion about that idea is that it's too little, it's too little too late, and it wouldn't be feasible in this moment. So this is the course of my thinking throughout the primary as a first-time politician. I now have a platform that I'm going to tell you what it is. It is airtight background checks, which I don't believe Mr. Reed supports. And then Congress has no other role in legislating restrictions on responsible gun owners. I do, however, believe that Congress has to repeal the immunity it has given gun manufacturers and gun sellers from civil suits. As I believe that an immunity like that for any special interest is a violation of the 7th Amendment. And that is the amendment where you get to go to court and have your case adjudged by a community of your peers, a jury of your peers. And I believe for Congress, and they've done it to more than just the gun manufacturers, they've given it to the telecommunication companies that they knew were in cahoots, as my mother would have said, with the Bush administration in collecting information in violation of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. So right around in that era, 2005, there were two major special interests that got this immunity from civil suits: telecommunication companies and gun manufacturers and sellers. I think both of those things are a violation of our 7th Amendment. I don't think Congress has any right to be giving their special interest donors immunity from civil suits and our Constitution. And I also believe that that is the appropriate approach to take to the challenge that we have balancing Second Amendment rights and gun safety in this country. Congress is a federal body, as you know, and so when it says a law, it applies to everybody. This country is too various. Telling a 15-year-old kid in Point Barrow, Alaska, to have the same rules as a kid in downtown Manhattan, New York, just doesn't make sense. Leave it to the states and leave it to the courts. Get it out of the hands of Congress, except for airtight background checks, and get rid of that immunity so we can get to the courts to deal with the other aspects of it. Remember, $50, he's going to say, Tracy Mitrano flip-flops on the second.
Let's talk national security.
Oh, I'd love to.
Alice from Interlincoln asks, we've learned yet again this week that outside agencies meddled in previous elections. So with your background in cybersecurity, what will you do to keep our processes safe?
Well, first I want to ask, what has Tom Reed proposed? Nothing. Nothing. He doesn't even talk about it. Why? Because we have a president who can't get out of his own way to address cybersecurity seriously because he thinks it's all about himself. What would I do? I would, as a congressperson or like with a magic wand? As a congressperson, I would begin to advocate that what we need is some form of global internet governance. Technology is not going to fix this problem. It's a cat and mouse game when it comes to technology. You cannot govern behavior in any arena unless you have rules about it. And we have no rules about this. There's no international law on it. There has been no diplomacy on it apart from the occasional handshake between President Obama and the President of the People's Republic of China 4 years ago in 2014. We have to have some rules about it. That takes diplomacy. That takes hard conversations with stakeholders all around the planet. So when the Russians did what they did in terms of the 2016, and they're doing it as your question suggests now, if I were to hack into John's computer in the United States, I've committed a very serious crime. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, 1986. But when the Russians do it overseas, There is no international law making it a crime. So how are we going to begin to address cyber insecurity unless we have some rules that are the basic framework for it? Instead, the Trump administration, whom Mr. Reid supports, has issued a national cybersecurity strategy just last month. And in it, he has called for, or the strategy calls for, streamlining decision-making about offensive actions of nation-state attacks. Nation-state attacks are a nation is attacking another nation. The Russian interference was a nation-state attack. When I worked at Cornell, all of the People's Republic of China that constantly barraged the Cornell networks and took out library journals, research data, intellectual property, most of them, we believe, were coming from a military component of the People's Republic government. That's a nation-state attack. That's to be distinguished from organized criminals who want to get into a banking system and suck money out. Or kids who are just playing on the internet and have script kiddies, if that's a familiar concept. We have no laws about this. We have to have laws about it. And let me now give you something to be scared about. The Trump administration also said that they have streamlined the decision-making process for offensive cybersecurity attacks that they want everyone to know they're going to enact. That means we are not involved in the conversation, and guess what? Neither is Congress. And that brings back a conundrum we have had ever since the end of the Second World War. The Korean conflict, the Vietnam conflict, all of the various invasions that we have engaged in as a country throughout, there has not been a declaration of war, which according to Article 1 is the power of Congress. Now that's countervailing to the commander-in-chief authority that the president has. We have not properly had this conversation, but I, as a citizen, do not feel good about this administration saying they are going to do cybersecurity attacks offensively and assuming that Congress has no role in that. And if Congress has no role in it, neither do the citizens whom Congress represents. I think that's a very scary scenario.
So what about something as simple, say, as requiring paper ballots? Obviously, this is a very big problem.
Oh, you're talking
What
about those elections.
Reining it in in terms of election security. What are some of the things that you propose could be done to keep it safe?
All election systems stay off the internet. That's my solution. It's insecure. You know, when the internet was developed, it was developed in something of a hermetically sealed vacuum of higher education, research one institutions such as Cornell, government, DARPA, I don't know if you're familiar with DARPA, that's the advanced research arm of the Department of Defense, and then some early corporate entities such as Intel. And in that closed network environment, everyone was a trusted player. And they developed the packet switching, which is the science, into this innovation of a network system that uses it. And obviously, it's a big improvement over what used to be what is called a shared communication line, where the whole line is dedicated to that conversation. What's so brilliant about using packing switching and the internet is it breaks up information, it digitizes it, breaks it up, and then it sends it out onto all kinds of pathways that routers and switches reorganize at the endpoint. So while it was not developed in light of a nuclear attack, it has great utility because if you nuke the shared line, the communication's broken, there's no alternative path, it's done. If you break a line of internet communication, it's going to automatically reroute through some other place. So it's a much more effective, much more efficient form of communication. But what was not considered in the development was the so-called security of it. It's totally agnostic as a technology. It will carry a virus, it will carry a computer worm, and it will carry the next great American novel. There's no discrimination at the technical level of the protocols that control the internet as to what it's carrying and what it's about. So when you then open up this beautifully architected network system to all of humanity, which has good and it has bad, you invite all that humanity represents, including adversaries in competition on an international scale. And that's what we're dealing with, and that's what I'm saying. We need rules now to address it. The technology itself is not going to be solution enough. Do we need technology? Yes, all of that, but it will never be the solution. We need rules now. And that's where I find no understanding, no creativity, no initiative on the part of the president or on the part of Congressman Reed to stand up and say.
So we've got a couple questions before we open up to the audience and just let them throw some questions at you. A couple ones that didn't really fit into any one category that great.
Okay.
This one came from someone in the audience just a little while ago. What is your stance on privatizing prisons, and how do you feel about prison reform?
I am totally against privatizing prison, and I do think that we need to be looking at reform in a comprehensive way. If it is not obvious to any of you that we are stockpiling in far greater proportion African American and Latino men in our prisons, because there is this assumption that either they are criminals by virtue of their ethnicity, or because they are people expendable to us as a community, I can tell you that is how it comes off to me. So I think we need to do prison reform, but we need to do it in the context of larger social questions that still need to be addressed. Poverty, racism, immigration.
So are those some of the things that you would like to see changed also or reformed also on the law enforcement front? If you could just sort of give us your thoughts on what changes you would like to see or push for in law enforcement.
Specific things, let's legalize and regulate cannabis. And let's give an amnesty to the people who are in jail on very low level amounts of possession, and that we have been filling the jails up with them. Let's be sure we have sound constitutional practices when we have stop and frisk. And let's be sure that we are addressing profiling. And on the matter of law enforcement abuse of Latino and African American people, I am in favor of a federally funded program to come out of the Justice Department for the training of law enforcement people throughout the United States. I believe that part of what has been contributing to the tragedies that we have seen played out over and over again in this country is that so often the training is done by consultants. No one is looking at that training, but if you do, you will see that it instills more fear rather than confidence, and it privileges escalation rather than de-escalation of events. And I think that would be, for the federal level, the right approach. And that would be a requirement for anyone, armed law enforcement, local, state, or federal, that they would have to have that training. That we could all see, by the way, and comment on, and talk about, including the communities at risk.
So if elected, how do we move forward away from the groupthink or identity politics that seems to be getting lose an awful lot? How would you be an independent thinker and an independent actor in Congress?
Well, I'll tell you this, Josh. One thing you could never accuse me of is being a conformist thinker. Ask anyone at Cornell where I worked about that. My position on firearms is a really good example. Do you know any other candidate who has the same position that I do? I don't. I came up with it myself, and so when Tom Reed will say Tracy flip-flops on the Second Amendment, Tracy's going to say, I don't come from an environment where people give me my talking points so I can get an A on their NRA test. I come from a world where we talk about these things, and we think about these things. So I have taken my time as a candidate to really talk and really think about it. And I think I've come up with something I feel good about and that I want you all to think about, I want the United States to think about. I err on the side of independent thinking.
All right, so now I think we're gonna shift.
Oh, okay, I am just here to say we have a little over half an hour, and this is the spontaneous chaos portion of our show. You've all been really good at listening. I invite you all to ask Tracy questions. The ground rule is that no more than one question per person. Is that how we're doing it?
Yep, sounds good.
Tracy, you can take your own
Yes,
questions.
sir.
This gentleman here was start.
Could you address the conundrum that Trump finds himself now with Saudi Arabia? We know that Mr. Reid, as you referred to, is going to support Trump, and Trump wants to keep the arms sales going. And
Yes.
can you just address that whole issue?
Well, we have a president who has an unstable relationship with the truth, to begin with. And if Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
And the president. And was that the same question, or you just want to get in the queue for a question?
I was just glad I come to the meeting. You answered all kinds of questions. I didn't believe it. You know, you told so much. I couldn't believe you'd ask so many questions. I'm thankful that I come to your meeting, and I'm going to support your election. You were wonderful.
Thank you. All right, we're done now. The evidence, you know, there's one thing I don't know, but maybe someone knows it better. Why has Turkey been so interested in getting this information out? I still don't know the answer to that question, but I'm curious about it. So I'm going to put this in the parking lot. But let's assume that what Turkey has sent out about entrapping him in the embassy in Ankara and attacking him, torturing him, dismembering him, it so violates the most basic levels of civility that to have a president wash over it with, well, we've got X amount of dollars wrapped up in sales, again, just underscores a point that we all, or many of us, seem to have already gotten, that he has no moral compass. And so in light of all of that, if I were president, I would stop those sales cold until we figured all of this out. And add to it what's been going on in Yemen. I have been watching that. And it's an S show. If you know what I mean. We are abetting a country that the evidence suggests, and this is from independent news sources, that Saudi Arabia is targeting children. Well, of course Mr. Trump doesn't care about that because he also cages them at our borders. So that's consistent, but it's repulsive. And here is another good example. Thank you. I'll start to use it. Why doesn't Mr. Reid stand up and say, "Have you no decency, sir?" Which is how we ended the McCarthy era with that comment. But it's pertinent today. Thank you. Other questions?
What can be done in the next 2 days to help get you elected?
You know, this is key. Phone banking, door to door. If you have money, please give it, because Mr. Reid still has such an enormous advantage in name recognition. And while I am very proud of my team and of this community for having helped me raise over now $1 million, it is still not enough. How big is Mr. Reid's war chest? Oh, yeah. Well, you do know it's a representative from Mr. Reid's.
It's over 2 million.
Yeah, and it might be even, I'm thinking 2.5. But, the point is, we just have to get the word out. And it costs a lot of money. It costs $130,000 per 30-second commercial in every single market. And there's 4 or 5 markets in this district because of the weird, to me it's not a weird geography. I'm from Western New York and I've lived in the Finger Lakes and Southern Tier all my life. So it's a great geography as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of media markets, it cuts through Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Elmira, Corning, and over in Tioga, Binghamton. And I'll just be honest with you, we haven't had the money to put into Binghamton. So there's a whole county that is still not addressed. So we really need is everything that you can give. Everything that you can give. And I know some people have given a lot. Yes, sir.
I used to work for Dresser Ant
Yes,
since I
sir.
retired.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things you said a little concerned me. One of the problems we had was selling goods internationally,
Yes.
and too often our Congress wanted to put embargoes on countries, which interfered with that. It's
Yes.
just bad business.
Yes.
You were talking about Saudi Arabia, okay, and you want to punish bad behavior. But the question, how do you punish the bad behavior without killing business for our exporters?
Well, I am not in favor of this tariff war under the Trump administration. And you know, that brings us back to that question about manufacturing. If Mr. Reed really cared about manufacturing, he would stand up to it also. I'm going to give you maybe 3 to 5 examples. There's a manufacturer in Elmira, Corning. They're down 40% because of the cost of steel and aluminum. The wine industry that is so important to our region in this county is suffering doubly because not only do they use steel for some of the fermentation, but the tariffs are hurting them just like they're hurting wine manufacturers and producers in California. I speak to farmers about the soybean and the corn, and they tell me, I don't want that little handout. And by the way, it's been ratcheting it back behind the scenes. We got the big press release, $12 billion, and it's been being ratcheted back. And by the way, Mr. Reed has been in favor of holding up the Farm Bill in order to try to get, so he's holding up hostage of millions of people around this country and hundreds of thousands of people in this district because he wants to add reporting and work requirements to food stamps when they already exist. This is a very facetious attempt. You asked me in the beginning about social programs. It's a very facetious attempt to undermine SNAP. And the expectation is if they can get these requirements in, people will be tripped up and about 2 to 3 million people will be knocked off of it. And it has nothing to do with getting people up for work. Those requirements already exist. So in a word, I am not for these tariffs. Now with Saudi Arabia, it seems to me it's a little different because we're talking about basic decency and civility. We are not talking about differences that we have about trade imbalances. So to me, it's almost a separate discussion. Does that make sense to you?
Well, my opinion is that we shouldn't embargo the trade,
Right.
okay?
And I'm
What we
agreeing with
should-
you.
What we should do, though, is to punish, go after the money and go after the people, okay? You know, don't say, hey, we're not going to sell compressors, which is what I used to do,
Right,
okay? We sold a lot of compressors to Saudi Arabia.
right.
But do punish the people, okay?
I think in the case of the Prince of Saudi Arabia, how else are you going to punish him but stop giving him all of that war material? I don't think there's another way to punish him, unless I'm just not thinking.
Well, we've been allies with these people for the last 50 years.
Yeah, and that's
And we'll
concerned me
continue
too,
to
frankly.
going
Do
forward.
you remember how many Saudi Arabians were part of 9/11 attacks?
Yeah, I'm very aware that bad people.
Well, believe me, I am all for creating jobs. That's what my platform is all about, to create opportunity for jobs. But there are some issues about which I don't think we can ignore, and I think this is one of them because it is so horrific, if the evidence is correct. And that's why I was asking about if people have a better understanding than I do about why Turkey has been pushing it. You know, there are also approaches that one can take, opening up other markets, for example. You know, if you're not going to deal with Saudi Arabia, how about we open up other markets? I know this in terms of what some of the farmers have said to me. What can you do to help us? Well, there's a lot of what we make in this district that I am sure would be of interest to people, say the People's Republic of China or India, and I'm identifying those two places because the populations are so large, so there's an opportunity for a lot of trade. But we never see about alternatives. We under this administration, we're just kind of throwing up these tariffs. And that seems to be arbitrary and capricious. There are now over 10,000 items that are under tariffs, and the tariff wars are ratcheting up. I don't see the utility of it. I am very glad for the revisions to NAFTA for Mexico, in which we increased the opportunities for people to make better wages and have improved U.S. manufacturing side of it. I don't think that what we did with Canada was that much. Certainly that's what the farmers are telling me. That's what the dairy farmers are telling me. It's coming too little too late, and it's not really going to help that much. So to be saying, I have a brand new agreement plan that I've made, and it's, you know, the greatest thing since sliced bread, I think is a misrepresentation. NAFTA was long in the tooth. It needed to be reformed, and it has been reformed. I think in both Canada and Mexico cases, beneficially for us. I don't think enough, actually, in the case of Canada, especially in dairy. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I think most of what was agreed with NAFTA was already agreed with the TPP.
Yes, I agree with you about that.
But my concern is still that it's bad business, okay? Because when you turn around to countries that you've sold all these aircraft to and so on, and you say you're not going to sell them spare parts, you're creating the impression to the whole world that you're an unreliable supplier. And that hurts jobs here. You've got to be very, very slow to put export restrictions.
We should be slow. So I'm agreeing with you because I'm saying all the tariffs, I disagree with it and the approach. When it comes to the Saudi Arabian thing, it should be with conditions. We're going to stop the sales until there's a proper international investigation about what happened and consequences. I think ideally what I would like is that prince to go. And then you open the sales up.
Yeah. But I think the approach we had with Russia was a better one, which was we put restrictions on certain people being able to travel to the US and being able to put their money in international markets.
Well, you know we've got a lot of embargoes on them too, right? How do you feel about those?
I don't like embargoes.
Well, for the most part, mine is wrong. Other questions and thoughts? Yes?
You've talked some about campaign finance and how much money each person has in a basket. From what I've read, Mr. Reed has made a lot of money, or raised a lot of money, shouldn't say made a lot of money, raised a lot of money from corporations and PACs.
Yes.
And from what I've seen in your campaign, you said somewhere around 75% of what you raised has come from our district.
Yes.
But there were no corporate or PAC donations. Does that mean that if, say, Gould's Pump in Seneca Falls offered you a donation, you would refuse it? And if so, would you take it from your president, et cetera?
So what I have pledged to is taking no corporate PAC money.
Okay.
And I haven't.
Okay.
I have taken from PACs, for example, Senator Gillibrand supported us. And how she holds her campaign money is in a PAC. And so she gave us $5,000 and we very gratefully accepted that. So it's no corporate PACs. If Gould wants to give me $2,700, what time can I show up to pick up the check?
I'm not affiliated.
But if they have a corporate PAC, we wouldn't accept the money from that. And you know, this was a hard decision for me to come to. I could have gotten money from a lot of the organizations that are sprouting up now to say no corporate PACs, but I didn't want to do it right away in my campaign because I needed to understand it better. And it's a very imperfect pledge because there are corporations I would feel really good about accepting money from. Corning. You know, I can't say enough good things about Corning Incorporated. And I know they have a PAC. And I had someone come up to me at a fundraiser in the city of Corning and say, you know, she was kind of a highly placed person, and she wanted to say, I'm gonna go back and talk to the executives, and then I said, I can't. So it's not a perfect thing, but right now, the effect on democracy, on our politics, of how corporate PACs are driving the decisions in Congress, I think I have to go a little further out from my own comfort zone about it to say it in order to make the point. Yes, ma'am.
How can you help the general public school system for the students in their mental health issues? What is your approach for it?
Yeah, are you thinking of maybe some of the things in Elmira?
Or in general public school, like a shooting because of their mental health issues and stuff like that. I'm thinking, how can you improve that in our county or in our society?
Right. Well, I'm not for these voucher systems. I really think we need to keep our precious public school funds in our public schools. I do understand that public schools are run on their area taxes, and that is the reason why we have such savage inequalities in our public schools throughout this district and throughout this country. I am not for, you probably heard me, telling teachers what to do and so forth. But I do think it would be a good idea to have hearings in Congress on this issue and a host of others. How are we going to level the playing field for students around this country when the source of funding comes in such a way that it creates the difference? And then there are other issues about the environment that certainly, you know, go right into that investigation. Yeah. Thank you. Are you a school teacher? No. Yes.
Kind of in that same sense, because I have a son that's in school now, and I think in this area especially, we're seeing younger people that have children move out because we have very high taxes, and we also have not as much sustainable jobs that are here for younger people that are just getting out of school
Right.
in order to start. Is there something that you can do from a federal stance to be able to help the 23rd district when it comes to generating jobs for younger people?
Well, I don't know if you came in late.
I did, especially
Okay.
because we give so much federally in New York State taxes, and that's why a lot of people complain, right? Because New York has such high taxes.
Right.
However, we're really not getting as much back from the federal government as we're putting in as New York State. So I would like to know kind of specifically what your plan is, and I'm sorry if I came late to the party, but for that, I guess I like specifics. Because I don't think it matters if you're Republican, if you're Democrat, if you're Tom Reed, if he comes up with that, I would vote for him as well. I think we just need to know specifically how you're going to help our generation.
Yeah. We do have a state with a lot of taxes. We also have a state that has better school systems on average, whatever the deficits are. It's a better school system than a whole lot of other states.
But we have such low enrollment now as well because we don't have that many. I mean, our local school districts enrollments have been decreasing pretty steadily over the last probably 10 years.
Yeah. The population in this district has been decreasing. One of the big concerns I hear about is families who have been in an area for generations now have their children leave to go to college and they don't come back because there aren't opportunities for them here. And this is breaking up our communities. It's breaking up our families. It's breaking up traditions that we've had going, you know, generations back. So let me briefly say, in order to attract new businesses, I don't think it's a matter of one jobs plan in Jamestown or an enterprise zone in Seneca Falls, especially at the federal level. That might work for the state. You know, I just attended a $10 million gift to Penn that Kathy Hochul, Lieutenant Governor, gave. And that's on top of $2 million they got a few years ago. I was in Fredonia yesterday, and the mayor there told me they're getting $2 million to improve. And then if they handle it responsibly, they'll probably get the 10 down the road. That's state. That's state. So sometimes the tax dollars do come back to the communities that are working on it. At the federal level, You need healthy people, educated and trained people, the right kind of infrastructure, proper resource management, and a good tax plan. You tell me what Tom Reed has done in the last 8 years to help with any of those 5 things that lays the foundation for when, where, why, and how an investor will come and invest. I ask you all. He's made a tax plan that gives money away to the wealthy and is like a Trojan horse on the working and middle class that's going to bust out in a few years. He has put this $10,000 cap deduction on state and local taxes when we have high state and local taxes, and he didn't stand up to say, don't do that to my state, my district. He wanted to frat, but New York State put up a ban. He's done nothing to bring the internet out to half of this district that doesn't have it. He's done nothing to help with those interest rates on student loans that burden the young generation especially. He's done nothing to, until he heard me talk about public-private partnerships, he's done nothing to talk about how we can work with community colleges and support. I'm actually in favor, by the way, of full support tuition up to the level of an associate's degree. I am not, however, a democratic socialist, and I do not believe that 4-year graduate and professional degrees should be free. Why? I'm concerned about the unintended consequence that someone such as Senator Sanders never mentions when he compares us to Europe. They have a tracking system. The unintended consequence of free tuition is suddenly you're tracked from a young age. That's not the culture and tradition of the United States education. But I do think that we can support people through an associate's degree so that they can get a job, and that includes, by the way, not just at community colleges and universities, vocational, trade, and certification training, and not with usurious interest rates. Has Tom Reed said, have you heard him in the last 8 years talk about any of this? And how about that health care? So that's my plan. I see it comprehensively, in part because it's a federal issue. If I were running for state office, I might be talking about an enterprise zone. I might be doing what Kathy Hochul and Governor Cuomo are doing, which is metering out monies to various municipalities that are trying to rejuvenate. But at the federal level, this is how you bring jobs to your district. Your thoughts?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I agree. I feel, now you're making me think.
Yes, I've done my duty, my job here is done.
I guess it's easy to say, I mean, from someone who has a lot of student loans. I
Yes.
have a sizable, I can buy a few houses.
Right.
I also feel like, I'm very lucky because I get paid pretty decently to be able to pay off my student loans, but there's so many people that don't.
Right.
And I know we keep talking so easily about kind of getting rid of student loans for people, but then what do you do with the money that people have? Like, what is your idea, I guess, to get rid of people's student loans or help people that are burdened by student loans? Because it's easy to say, yeah, we'll help people that have student loans, but then when we don't have people paying back their student loans, what happens?
Well, who's benefiting from those student loans?
Well, yes, I agree.
Who? What industry?
Yeah.
No, not yet. What is it?
The banking
The banking
industry.
industry.
Yeah,
They gave Tom Ray $130,000 last year.
Yeah.
Do you think that he's going to stand up for usurious interest rates? Yes, actually, the way I said it. So, but you've asked a good question that I don't have a real good answer to, which is what are we going to do about the people who already have those interest rates? I think we can think of programs in which we can try to address that burdensome debt. What are the interest rates, Senators?
Oh, gosh. I pay out of, it's really bad. I should know this off the top of my head, and I don't because I just switched it around, so it's a little bit differently now, but mine's broken up into multiples.
Yes, most are.
Because I did a 10-year pay. I work for a not-for-profit, so I got kind of lucky.
Some reduction.
Yeah, so I get 10%. But they're a good, 27. They're pretty high because of the way.
I've never heard of that.
Wait,
I
I'm
never
so
heard
sorry.
up to 12.
6.5?
Yeah.
6.3?
Okay, well, that's on the lower end of where
Yeah,
you
I got
said
what
it,
I was
right? And so, what could you get a mortgage for, more or less?
Oh, like right now?
4 or 5.
4, 6, yeah.
4 or 5. And how about a loan on a car?
8.6.
Oh, car, yeah, sometimes
Cars
0.
are way-
No, 1 or 2. Yeah.
I don't know what you're complaining about. When I got my mortgage in my house, I was paying over 12% interest on it.
Well, here we go. 70s, right?
Yeah, we
it's
do.
the 70s.
14 and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's like,
But we've been in an economic decline.
I know.
For,
I
yeah.
think that's my point too, is that you're expecting people to come out with in our area, we're expecting people to come out with specialized degrees so that they can actually get into the workforce.
Yeah.
So as you're doing that, you're going to keep accruing more and more student loans, but the
Yes.
jobs aren't here for people that are coming out. They're
Yes.
in like North Carolina and South Carolina, and
Yes.
that's where everybody's going to. And so we don't have a huge sustainable area here because, no offense, but a lot of our population here tends to be a little bit older, and so we don't have that.
You noticed.
I apologize first before I said anything. But I guess, and that, it's just a cycle that just keeps happening that it'd be nice to be able to break.
Well,
Can I just say something? In Geneva,
Yeah, they know, right?
in Geneva, we're finding young people coming back.
Yeah,
And
definitely
it's
Geneva, yeah.
very exciting.
yeah. In
Because
a
they're
concordia.
learning.
Yes, yes. But so that is that's exactly what I am talking about. It's not going to be one jobs program or something like that. We need to fix what Tom Reed has neglected. He's done none of the things, the 5 things that you need to cultivate interest of investors to come here. He's voted against them or been negligent about them every single time. Yes.
I work in this community and I work in engineering.
Uh-huh.
We have a lot of jobs and they can't be filled because we're neglecting vocational training. These
Yes.
are jobs they pay more. Like I did my undergrad in liberal arts
Yeah.
and soon realized that I was completely unemployable.
Uh-huh.
I graduated with a 4.0 with a degree in political science from Nazareth College.
Mm-hmm.
Unhireable. I finished my degree in engineering. I started with just certifications in engineering.
Yeah.
And then now I work in this community, and there are tons of jobs in this community that start at about $25 an hour with full benefits and the pension, which is more than most of my friends who,
Right.
did a lot of very thoughtful, intelligent degrees. It's a lot more than they can get. I think it's to some degree, I wish somebody had told me about vocational training back when I was starting college, and I think this is something that may be neglected. I think to some degree we push brighter children, they seem brighter, into liberal arts degrees that are worthless.
Yeah,
Worthless. Yeah, let's just go
I have a
with
bachelor's in psychology too.
Yeah. And they're high finance degrees.
Yeah, and so you're hearing that I want to support vocational
Right.
trade and certification program.
We can't go on.
Yeah,
It's a very good program, especially right after the high school students.
yes, I love that.
Want to spend the money in the high school or in the colleges, don't know what to do, and spend all kind of grant money and their loans and everything.
Right, and then they don't really have a good certificate or something to get a job. No, I'm very, very much for that. And I'm very proud to have created one. I'm very, thank you. I'm very proud to have created one because I really saw how you do it. We worked with the Mass Mutual Corporation. They gave us $3 million. The university put stuff in. We worked with the corporations in the western Massachusetts area to find out, what their needs were, whether it was a big employer like the insurance company or like Peter Pan Trailways. They needed one information security person. You tailor it to the needs of your area. Yeah. Thank you. Who has a final question or thought? Yes.
Back to Social Security and Medicare. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts, what are your philosophies on how we shore up these programs?
Vote Tom Reed out. We paid into these programs. We have a rhetoric now that, and I'm not super keen. I mean, remember, I didn't grow up in politics. I wasn't a politician until I started for this position. Yes, I am a registered Democrat, but I'm not one of those big party people. DCCC hasn't given me a penny. I don't know Nancy Pelosi anything. So here's my thought about that. But I have to say, I'm sorry, the Republican Party has kind of been taken over by people who have created this rhetoric that these social programs are riddled with fraud and need to be undermined and replaced, and the management of the money needs to go out into the private market. And I just don't think the evidence shores any of that up. I have looked, I'm just as, even if I see someone litter, I have one of those personalities that I want to go tell them, go pick that up. I mean, I detest fraud. My father had a restaurant. It was, where I parked was down by the Genesee River, and then the restaurant was up on South Avenue, about 3 stories up. One day I drove up, I was about 17 years old, and I flinched. And I thought, what the hell is that? And I thought, okay, I had too much to drink last night, let's just keep on going. But then I flinched again. Someone was up in the kitchen, opened up the window, and they're throwing lobster tails and steak out. I mean, I do not like fraud, I do not like stealing, I do not like theft, right? There's 5% estimated fraud in SNAP. Does that mean we shut the whole program down? No, it's that old thing about don't cut your nose off to spite your face. Do you remember the market in 2008, 2009? Okay, so now it's up a little bit, but what goes up will come down. Just look at the history of U.S. economics and you see it going like that. I do not trust giving the money I've paid into to a private investor to manage it for me. The U.S. government is not perfect. No government's perfect. But you know what? They haven't done a bad job holding on to that money and being sure that people get it. Now, they're not doing as good a job as I want. I talk to people all over this district. They tell me they wait months when they go to Social Security Administration to resolve various issues. I think we need to be funding that better. People shouldn't have to wait months when a partner dies. I talked to one woman, her husband died. It took 5-6 months to get going. So nothing is perfect. But the alternative of giving it to investors, are you kidding? Kiss it goodbye if that's what you think, in my view. So I really believe it's voting people who are responsible into Congress. And by the way, there are a lot of Democrats, from my view, who have been corrupted by corporate donations just as much as a Republican. I think that was part of what people were concerned about in the presidential election of 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And, it gave me pause, too. I think the Democratic Party has gotten away from its roots with working people. I think the Democratic Party has gotten too overwhelmed with money people and corporate influence. Yes, I do believe that. But right now, I think the driving force to really undermine those programs is largely coming from Republicans. And so right now I can only speak for myself. If you're concerned about your Social Security and Medicare, vote for me, because I don't trust that Tom Reed is genuinely concerned for you to protect it.